Okie doke. All right. Hi, everyone. This is the Sparked HL7 AU eRequesting TDG meeting for Thursday, the 19th of December. This is our last meeting before Christmas, obviously, and we're going to cover off approval of minutes, and then Michael's going to walk us through ballot for comment resolution, report back on last week's Connectathon, and scope refinement before we look at the schedule for January. So we have two sets of minutes to approve. So let's bring up the first one. So these are the meeting minutes for the 21st of the 11th, which was the meeting held in the Marriott. Would anyone like to motion to approve these?
I'll motion to approve that.
I'll second Michael Osborne.
Thank you very much. All right, so we shall launch the poll to approve the minutes. You should now see this on the screen. If you can just click affirmative, negative, or abstain, and we'll wrap that one up quickly. All right, that one's looking pretty good. We'll close that one off in 3, 2, 1. And that one is passed. 11 affirmative, 10 abstained of 21 voting. All right, so let's move on to the next one. These are the meeting minutes from the 9th. Oh, that's today. Okay. We don't have to do anything today.
Wrong link. That link
should it be?
If you follow that link, it'll get you close. And
this one?
The
12th?
should be the 5th.
The 12th? Yeah, okay. There we go.
These were sent out in an email for everyone to review as well. So it's just the slide was wrong.
Cool. All right. So these are the meeting minutes from the 5th of December. Would anyone like to motion to approve those?
I'll motion.
Well, going over.
Sorry.
Michael Wilson's motioning. Who's seconding?
I'll second. Josh.
Oh. Josh is seconding.
Okay.
Share the joy.
All right. So you should see a new approval of minutes poll. If you could vote affirmative, negative, or abstain, please. All right, we'll wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and that one is passed. 11 affirmative, 13 abstained. Brilliant. All right, so just moving on to the action items. Anyone have any updates they want to make on any of these today?
I was just going to say, I think all the ones, or a number of those in the middle, the principles for inclusion, review of use cases, maybe in scope items. So they were all sent out for the TDG to review the compliments pages, and we'll be going through those today. So they'll be closed off today. I don't think Brett's on the call unless he is for that last one about the AFMM level. So we might leave that one. We're also going to potentially talk about pregnancy status in the context of ballot comment as well as scope. So,
okay. All right, cool. Well, shall we hand over to you then, Michael?
Yep, that sounds good. Let me share the window. I think you need to approve the request for me to share.
Done.
Let's go. Yeah. Try that. Hopefully we're in the same place. Wrong way. Okay. Ballot comment resolution. There hasn't really been much change from the last meeting on this. We've still got 100% triage. We've got 54 issues. We've got one outstanding. I haven't actually done an update on the applied. That number will be slightly higher, but we'd made an effort to get all the normative changes in so we can do some testing at the Connectathon. So there's not a lot of update on that, but we do just need to get through the last item to complete the ballot for comment. That item is out. Oh, sorry, this is a bit of a stats on what types of changes we had in the ballot for comment. Most of them were change requests, a few technical corrections, a few were out of scope, or comments were invalid. But this is our last item that's remaining for ballot for comment, was pregnancy status. I was thinking that we might come back round to this one after we do some more of the scope refinement, given this pregnancy status is potentially a scope item, as whether we're including it in R1 or not. I know, Andy, you were going to potentially talk to this one. Do you want to do it now or wait till we go through some more of the scope refinement about getting a resolution on this one?
Let's go through some scope refinement first.
Yeah, I think it falls in that scope one as well. So we'll come back, we'll circle back around to this. I think one of the scope items was actually pregnancy status. So if we decide it's our scope, then this one becomes a considered future use. If it is in scope, then we'll look at the resolution. So I think that's the approach for that. For the report back from the Connectathon, so we had the Connectathon last week in Melbourne. We had an eRequesting track as part of that Connectathon. The goals of that was we took a snapshot of the eRequesting IG. It was a 020 preview, and that had the majority of the changes that had come in through ballot for comment that was there, and it had service request, had task, and a few other bits and pieces that we had in there. So we took a snapshot as it was. So the idea was to test that and get any feedback on implementation of it. And the other thing we wanted to do was test concepts for new features in eRequesting. So things like request groups. So that was, we kind of wanted to do the current where we're up to, but also look into the future about how we can bring in some other features into eRequesting. We had a number of participants on the day. We had Magenta, Sonic, Beta, Healthcare Interop, Microsoft Research, Telstra Health, and CSIRO participating. So we had a good turnout. There was 2 other tracks as well running at the same time. We had an AU Core track as well as Smart on Fire track. So there was a huge turnout for the Connectathon. It was a really good event. Some of the notable achievements we had with a CanShare and FirePath Labs. So there was a CanShare was a logical modeler that was creating fire questionnaires with diagnostic requests. So that logical model was used to create fire questionnaire. The questionnaire was rendered and completed, and then FirePath Lab was used to extract the resources out of that, including service request and task. And then there's a typo in there, but successfully submitted that transaction bundle to the Spark eRequesting reference server. So that was really a good implementation showing how you could capture the information through a questionnaire, extract the resources, and then submit them. And we successfully submitted that to the Spark server with validation and the like. So that was a good outcome. We also had the Sonic Health Sandbox, and so that was being used so we could stretch some of the participants to work with some of the things that we don't have in our IG yet, things like group tasks, as that implementation relied on it. So it gave people the opportunity to see whether that's the sort of solution we want to look for bringing in. So Beta EMR was able to successfully create their requests in there, and Telstra Health also managed to create their eRequest transaction bundle, was able to be submitted into that Sonic implementation as well. So they were good wins. We had a breakout session on request groups as well. So this was about talking about how we wanted to manage a set of tests that are ordered together. And we looked at options around using lists and service requests for a request group. We discussed different ways to sequence ordered tests so they could be reconciled with a paper request. And the option we sort of settled on was the use of both group task and a group service request with an extension on the child service request to express the sequence of ordered tests. So if anyone's interested, I will put this in the chat. This link was the page that we were going through in the, can you see my browser there? I'm just not sure I'm sharing the whole screen. Can you see the Confluence page? Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So this was the page. I'll put it in the chat. That's in the chat. So this was a discussion we had at the previous Connectathon, then created these models to talk about the different options. So we had the option here of using a list as a request group. We settled on this option of a service request. So just to go through this in a bit more detail, that the diagnostic request, whether we have an imaging request or a pathology request, which is a service request, would be based on a group, which would be the order of all the tests done together. And you'd be able to order those or have a sequence of those so you can match what would be on a printed form with an extension on that diagnostic request with sequence. So that was where we landed on that. What we'll look to do is put some more detail around this and bring that to discussion at the TDG. So this was just gave us an opportunity at the Connectathon to discuss ideas and come to what we think would be a solution that will work. But we'll bring that up to a future TDG meeting to firm that up. One we did spend a bit of time on was about a combination of having a service request with a list in it. What we found with this, there was going to be a cyclic reference, which was likely to cause us a number of problems. Vincent?
I wasn't at this discussion. I'm just a bit lost as to what you're trying to achieve here. Is this sort of implementing an order like a full blood count and then referencing the individual elements of that? Is that what this is trying to achieve?
No. So what it's trying to achieve is where the way it's done at the moment, we have one form with multiple tests listed on that form, right? So in our case here, each test is an individual service request. So there's currently no way to combine that into an order, as in all these tests were ordered together. So this is the requesting group problem we're trying to solve there.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
So like I said, that gave us an opportunity to explore these ideas, work through them. We will bring it to a future TDG. We had already decided in a previous TDG that request grouping was going to be in scope for R1. So that's why we used that opportunity at Connectathon to talk through some of these ideas.
Just
this
a
page,
quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
My name is Thomas. I am new to this group, but I am both a software engineer and a doctor, a clinician. It seems that definitely in scope is the ability to group tests, and that's certainly very important clinically for me.
Yeah.
But there also seems to be a lot of focus on the order of the tests in that group. And I want to just clarify, when you say order, as in the sequence, is that simply presentational, or is there some suggestion that tests get performed in that order? Because certainly when I order a dozen tests on a single form or a single submission or whatever it's called, I expect them to happen in a random order, but then I just kind of, I want to know when they're all done, if that makes sense. So the fact that in a group matters to me, that they're in a set, but the actual sequence of them is often less important clinically. So I just wonder, is this presentationally important, or where the impetus for the sequencing is?
Yeah, it's presentation when we're living in a hybrid world of paper and electronic. So I think that's around fulfillment, when if they're presented a paper form that has it printed on there, they're trying to reconcile with the electronic, make sure everything's there. But that having the same display order as what was printed on a form makes that easier, as opposed to, yeah, you've got a random list. It's not about the way they were going to be fulfilled, the order or the order of importance to the placer, but it is just that presentational if we are living in a hybrid world of paper and electronic.
Right. Okay. I suppose in that case, it's good to just emphasize this is presentational. And I also, if it is simply presentational, I know that if it's a very long list, perhaps having the same order is easier to check that you've got both things in both places. But the average list of tests is under a dozen, I would say, except if you're going to see some crazy rheumatologist. And so I wonder how high the priority is on this presentational aspect. The grouping is critical.
Yeah, I think
how high the priority is on the ability to set the presentation order.
Yeah, I think that was one of the options. Oh, sorry. Yeah, do you want to go, Andy?
I was just going to say that there's a couple of things here. One is that inherently FHIR collects these together via a reverse link, which inherently doesn't support any ordering whatsoever. And the issue of order is not so much a placer issue. It's more at the collection centre and collection centre staff, as Michael referred to. It's about reconciliation, and even a small list of half a dozen, it's still a kind of intellectual burden to kind of try to line them up on their collection centre systems when they're holding the paper order form. So even for a small number, even if you've even got two and they're not in the same order, you've kind of got just a burden that we can relatively simply remove by ensuring that we in the placer systems just carry through what the presented order on the paper was to the collection centre. But there's nothing necessarily innate in that order which would carry through maybe to a lab system, for instance.
Sorry, Josh, I'll just follow on for a second. I think the approach we had here with adding extension to the diagnostic request to sort of means that it's less important there too. Like if someone hadn't implemented that sequence, it would still work. So that was kind of one of the, whereas we're going for a list with an ordered list was more of a saying that order is really important. It's fundamental to the resource we're using, but this seemed to be sort of cover both bases there. Josh.
So I actually had a discussion with Heath on this now. I'm not saying that an extension isn't the way to go on this. I'm just wary that extensions have the potential to become the Z segment of FHIR. And certainly in a couple of implementations I've seen of this standard in some requesting formats, there's the use of the identifier field bringing across the set ID representation from V2, which would allow you to order these in the same aspect as having an extension if you're utilizing the identifier by numerically incrementing the identifier.
Yes, that is an option as well. So all we had, like I said, was at the Connectathon discussion around this. We didn't talk about all the options that were available. We talked about a couple that we had in line. We worked through some of these things. This is the starting point for bringing this into the TDG. So we'll certainly have opportunity here to work through the detail on exactly how we do that. But this is the starting point for forming a proposal to bring to the TDG. So, Ruben.
Thanks, Michael. Look, I just want to make a comment on Josh's comment about comparing extensions to Z segments. It's true that there is the potential for them to go that way, but the community has put many guardrails in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. And in particular, the creation of an open standard like eRequesting's Fire IG is one of the guardrails to prevent that. If the extension's in a profile, it's controlled and it's balloted, it won't have the fate of Z segments, which are uncontrolled and out in the wild. So I just wanted to make that point. It's a key principle of FIRE that extensions are not to be treated with any scorn. They should be controlled and managed, but they are a big part of implementing FIRE.
Certainly appreciate that feedback. Thank you, Ruben.
Like I said, this isn't the proposal yet. This is just what we pulled together. We will bring this into a future TDG meeting. It is in scope, so we'll bring it in so we can firm up exactly what we're going to do with it. But it was a good opportunity at the Connectathon to have the discussion and flesh some of these concepts out. Might jump back to the presentation. Feel free to comment on that page as well. So that's an open page. If you've got comments, you want to add other ideas, I think that's a page we will continue to use for request groups while we flesh this out. So definitely follow the link, add comments, add your own thoughts. Happy for anyone to contribute to that page. That's what we just talked about. Some other discussions. We had a discussion with Janie, the patient rep, about patients' inability to access their own health data from My Health Record, despite it being promotion as a key solution for health data sharing. So that was around the actual access to the data, not just being able to view it on screen, being able to access the structured data from My Health Record. We also just talked about authorization issues with via eRequesting repositories, focusing on how commercial interests might impact operational challenges for places and fillers, managing shared repositories, being able to see competitors' service requests and the like. So that was just a general conversation around that as well. Just some stats from the Connectathon. So we had two main sort of servers operating on the day. We had the Spark eRequesting server, and we had over 938 requests for that. Number of read and search operations, 600 transaction bundles, and some expand and validate on terminology, and around about 50 service requests and some 34 tasks. And Sonic Sandbox that was operating as well had a whole heap of resources there. I'm not going to read out all those numbers, but you can see we had a good number of resources being created between the two servers. I don't know if anyone else who was at Connectathon has anything they want to add, anything they took away from it or did or wanted to talk about. Happy for anyone else to jump in if they were there and had something they wanted to share with the group. No. Okay. But it's good. I mean, like I said, we had at the end of that.
Michael, I had a quick question, Mr. Chandan.
Yeah, Chandan.
Would we have the Spark eRequesting server with the profiles stored in the Connectathon on for a bit, or it will be turned off?
Yeah, it's still there, still available, still there for people to use. So the idea is that will turn into our reference server once we have an R1 release, and it will have the R1 version of eRequesting loaded in there. It will stay as a reference server. At the moment, it's very much still our test server, so it's evolving at the same time as we evolve the IG. So it's sort of up and down and has changes made to it, sort of ad hoc manner, but it will stay around and it will eventually turn into our reference server available for the community to use. So it is there and you can use it.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay. We might get into the big ticket item for the day, which is still what we're working through is the eRequesting scope refinement. So we started these conversations in the full day workshop in Melbourne a few weeks ago. We continued it in the last TDG. It's continuing in this TDG. We do need to bring this to a head and try and get through as much of this as possible so that we can finalize our R1 scope and we know what we are doing in the time that we have available to us. So the things that we have done already, we've reviewed the intent of R1, reviewed and updated the R1 timelines, and there's a few other items now that we need to finalize, including establishing the inclusion principles, confirming in-scope use cases, and identifying the essential scope items. So then hopefully at the end of this, we'll have a clear direction and picture for what's in R1, and we can focus on getting those things implemented in our timeline. So just a bit of a review of what we have approved. So this is the intent of eRequesting R1. So the key point for this is the middle paragraph here that AU eRequesting defines the data model and RESTful API interactions that set minimum expectations for placing and assessing electronic requests. And the focus of AU eRequesting R1 is support for pathology and medical imaging and community-based care with consideration for future use beyond this scope. So we've already agreed on that. We voted to make some changes to that in the TDG and they've been made. The other thing that we have agreed on is the eRequesting timeline. So this is now the revised timeline. This is 2025 that we have across here, with a target of doing a ballot for working standard in August, with publication over the end of the year and into early next year. Just for that publication process will take a little while to jump through all the hoops. So by early 2026, we are targeting a R1 release. But what that means is that we don't have a lot of time to get to the maturity level we need for that ballot working standard. We've only got the first portion of next year. We will likely have to have some testing events injected in here in June around then so that we can check the maturity of what we've been building and its fit for purpose. And just to give a summary of what that might mean is we only have between January and May next year about 9 to 10 TDG meetings. We'll have a March Connectathon to do some testing and work through some issues there as well. May to June, we'll need to solicit some pre-ballot comments. What we don't want to do is go to a ballot for working standard in August and end up with a whole heap of comments and issues. And by the time we get through the ballot process, we've had to make so many changes, we'll have to go to ballot again. So the idea is that we need to do some form of soliciting community comment prior to going to ballot so that we can resolve as many issues as possible before we get to the ballot. June, we'll have to look at some Spark testing events and the fire maturity model approval. And then July is publishing preparation approval for an August ballot. So early next year will be very front loaded. We have to get through a lot in a short amount of time. That's why it's important we clarify the scope. And when we're determining scope, understanding that what we put in scope needs to fit within these timelines so that we can actually achieve the working standard we're looking for. It will then roll into R2. We're not stopping at R1. So anything we don't cover in R1 will and then be prioritized for release 2. So it's not the end when we get to release 1. Okay, so establishing the inclusion principles for R1. So this is where we're looking at a set of guidelines. For this, there was a Confluence page sent out for this as well. So we might just work from that because we do have some feedback and comments there. Get to the right page. This one. All right. So this was sent out to the TDG for comment around these inclusion principles. So we had on here about these are guidelines for inclusion. We kind of took the AU core lead on this and making these guidelines. One of the key criteria here is it in being in the AU eRequest data for interoperability or applying technical context to that data for interoperability. It's got high interest for the TDG. It's required for an eRequesting use case and can go through the TDG consensus building within R1 timeline. So that's something we've always got to be conscious of here across all of these, that we've got to be able to do it within the timelines we've got. The difference for the maybe in scope was in eRecDI or high interest from technical design group. So this potentially things that are not in the eRecDI, but there is interest from the TDG here. And it's required for a use case and can go through the TDG. So I think one thing of note here, if something hasn't come through the AU eRec data for interoperability and it has clinical context, then it is probably going to take us longer to deal with because we will have to go back through the CDG and the like to get advice, clinical implications of some of the decisions we may be trying to make here. So one thing of note that we might have high interest in doing something, but we do still need the clinical oversight and going back through CDG, which can then impact our timelines. And then if it's another release, there's either low interest, it's not required for a use case, or it's unable to achieve technical consensus within the timelines. So I think we had a few comments down here from Andrew. Are you on the call? Did you want to talk through your comments? Yeah.
I only just very briefly. I'm still struggling to separate out from what it is that we intend R1 to be. Going on that, the intent of R1, I think, was clear from that previous slide, but the extent to which the things at the end of R1 are going to be deployable and usable and where they will be deployed or usable, for me, changes the scope of things. Are we thinking about people doing a limited production thing between Magentis and Sonic is cool, but is very different to imagining that we're doing a production rollout between across a federation of four players, because to do a federated thing between four players, you obviously have to do security authorization, business rules, and something else.
Yep.
And if you're not doing that, then let's not kid ourselves. We're not deploying out to a big federation of things. So is it a closed network? Is it an open network? What are we doing here for R1? And then that can help you decide on the scope, because if the closed network is only doing pathology, then, for instance, you can not do diagnostics, imaging. I mean, I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm just saying, like, in the definition of what it is you're going to actually deploy R1 to, or what you think you're going to deploy R1 to, can help you focus the scope.
Yeah, I think my take on this is that for R1, what we're really looking at is that foundation for interoperability that's on the data model and interactions, right? But agnostic to any ecosystem that will operate in, right? So that we have a number of players in the market that are implementing eRequesting solutions and like, and they're potentially doing different solutions, right? And moving in different directions. What hopefully R1 would do is help bring those different solutions together, understanding a common data model and sort of common interactions, right? But I don't think R1, I mean, we definitely don't have the time, or I don't think we even have the government direction on policy and infrastructure and those sorts of things to make any decisions about that ecosystem this operates in. Basically, you should be able to pick up R1 and implement it in your own ecosystem, however you see fit, whether that's between 2 parties or 3 parties or 4 parties or whatever. But I don't think R1 isn't going to be, here's the national solution. You all do this. You all talk to each other. This is how you authenticate to each other. This is how you do all this. I think that's an R2 on release when we have some more input from policy and infrastructure and the like about how this operates nationally in a fully interconnected ecosystem, right? I think what we're doing here in R1 is trying to set that foundation for that that data model and interactions, right? This is what we do in eRequesting, but where you implement it, how you implement it, with who, is kind of outside that scope of.
Okay. I mean, that's a good answer, and thank you. So I think that satisfies me. I mean, I think then the questions for, well, what's in scope is like which groups are implementing it, between whoever, you know, what are those little pockets of people doing things, and the things that in scope should be what's of concern to them. They're the ones who are implementing it, like, as in, so if Sonic and Magentas are implementing something, then obviously as a thing that, then what's of most interest to them should be the things that are in scope, because they're the things that are going to get implemented for their closed little, for their network. They're the only, they're the only things that are going to be trialed and actually put into production use in the R1 scope.
Yeah, I think too. I think that high interest, right? I mean, even if you're not there yet, this is the opportunity to sort of set the foundation for the future, right? So that at some point in the future, rather than having something thrown at you, you have to implement this and this is the way it works, right? It's the community now has the opportunity to say, well, this is how I would like it to work in the future, right? This is what I think. So we're in the ground level here, being able to sort of provide that direction on what we think is important and how we want this to work, as opposed to someone else has made all these decisions and said, now how you have to implement this. So I think that's where that high interest is. And yeah, it might be because you're implementing this system now, or you think that this is really important, we get this right and get it right now so that we can implement for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Vincent?
I'd like to just comment on that. I mean, this is a community standards process. It's not a discussion between Magentas and Sonic. They've already had that discussion. They're already implemented and they're already using it, as I understand it. What we're trying to achieve here is a base level of consensus across the community about the scope that the community thinks, you know, should be the initial useful standard. I think that's quite a different thing. So taking, you know, particular vendors and using that to constrain or extend what we're doing here, I don't think it's a very useful approach.
But in a world where we have to actually cut the scope, I mean, if we had an infinite amount of time, then yes, you should keep going with the scope to make it the minimum thing that, but if you have to draw a line and you have to cut things, then I don't know how we do that process if you're not basing it on what people are actually going to implement. And the only people who are implementing it are the people who... Well,
then I think it needs to be made explicit, because that's not the standards approach.
It's also
that's vendor takeover.
It's also worth considering that sometimes people will implement when there is a standard, as opposed to there being a standard because someone's implementing. That, you know, it sounds like there's less take up in diagnostic imaging, but if there was an available standard which had been arrived at through the appropriate mechanism, that might enable that as well.
True. But I mean, I'm saying all this in the spirit of, there's a time frame for R1 that's been decreed by others. That's a very tight time frame, and then we're going on to R2, where I think it's going to be more generally usable and applicable. We have this long list of things, and everyone keeps on trying to keep adding things into the list. There's 7 meetings to go. Someone has to decide on some things that aren't going to be in the thing. And I think the only practical way you can do that is by speaking to the people who are actually going to implement it. And I'm not saying that just because it's Sonic and Magenta. I don't care who is implementing it, but the opinions of those who are going to do the implementation in the next year is, I think, pretty important to getting it field tested and then moving on to R2.
Yeah, I think again it's that foundation for moving forward though. Again, just because we have a specification doesn't mean that people who are already implementing are going to switch over to use it, right? So that's where I think the R2 and beyond about the policy, the infrastructure, all these sorts of things about how this is going to work for the future comes into an R2. But the R1 is, we all agree that, you know what, this is what a request looks like. This is how we can share this information. This is what's important information to share. And that should be agnostic to the implementation, right? So that then, like, we might have someone new who, like you said, is going to build to the specification. Now I'm going to start implementing this into my solution. Now I've got a specification at R1. I know what I can start building to versus where do I start and what's important, and what's important to them might be not important to someone else. So trying to get that sort of common agreement in the community that this is the way we're moving forward with eRequesting. But it's only the beginning, right? It is, we need to start somewhere. We need to start with some of these important things. And that's where the clinical design group has come in with the AU eRecDI and identified a data model there that's important. We're trying to align it with the FIRE model. We're trying to align it with from the international to an Australian context. So trying to set that foundation for us moving forward.
But we also don't want to make this into, you know, the OSI stack, not making it into an academic exercise of, you know, we all think this. It's actually got to be grounded in implementation reality. So, you know, I hear what Vince is saying, but I think obviously we also have to take into account that those that have implemented this have experience with the mechanics of making this work in a reality, as opposed to theoretically, let's try this because it seems like an interesting approach. So that's why I think it's really important to get, you know, the experiences from the labs and the PMSs who are already doing eRequesting in FIRE, and make sure that certainly contributes to the conversation and how we optimize the way forward, because there's all sorts of interesting theoretical things we could do, but at the end of the day, this stuff has to be, you know, has a real clinical value and a financial underpinning that'll make it work.
I don't know if there's any other comments on this. I don't feel that there's anything too contentious in these guidelines. I mean, I think the anything we're doing has to come to a TDG, has to come to a vote, has to be motioned, has to be seconded, has to be voted. It's just as part of this grounding when we're moving forward and thinking about, do we have this in scope or not? We've got some guidelines that we can look to. Was it in AU eRequesting data for interoperability? Is it required for a use case? Can we do it in our timelines we're talking about? And is there higher interest, right? They're the sorts of things we're just using as some criteria to go, should we do it or not? And I think the big one's going to be the timelines for us, right? So for an R1, so that's going to be one of the key things we're looking forward to. This is just something to come back to and go, okay, we've talked about this issue. Can we make a decision on it? Is it in R1 or not? Do we have a little bit of guidance on pushing things out to an R2, or they're important, we need to bring them in now?
I might just chip in one final thought, which is that what's the value in allowing things that aren't in the AU eRequestDI R1, but of high interest? Is that perhaps does doing that sort of move away from consensus and community and get more towards the vendor interest? And particularly in the context of, you know, there's not enough time, maybe sticking quite rigidly to things that are in the AU eRequestDI is helpful.
Yeah, I think that's important to know, and I tried to raise that before about there might be high interest, and I think high interest is very broad, but it can be someone bringing something to the TDG saying, I think this is really important. I think it's really important for this reason, and getting the interest from the TDG that supports that to say, yes, then we believe that's interest. But what that can do, if there's clinical implications and it's not in AU eRecDI, then we have to involve the clinical design group. We have to extend, and that is going to add time. So that is something we need to be aware of, that we might think it's a really good idea, something we should look at, but it's going to be time implications if it's not already in eRecDI. We have to work through that process.
And there is always some creative tension, because there is a grey area in the middle, which, you know, constitutes things of some technical, administrative, workflow, financial perspectives that, in terms of an implementation, are essential for it to be in a production system. And yet don't necessarily have a significant clinical impact potentially. So, you know, that will be some areas in the middle which are more kind of interesting, but there are some things that are obviously quite clinical, and there's some things that are obviously quite technical, but it's a spectrum.
David?
Yeah, I was just going to say for R2, the thing that we might want to add there is around emerging policy areas that need to be considered, and also engagement with the national infrastructure. So it's great that we can have systems and protocols that work between private sector companies, but once the national infrastructure starts to mature around the HIE, I think that's going to put some requirements and guardrails around a lot of this too. So that really needs to be factored in for R2. We're hoping that R2 really is working in lockstep with the HIE development and any national infrastructure around eRequesting that might pop up. And so we want to make sure that when R2 comes out and people want to start using national infrastructure, we're all lined up and everyone's well aware, you know, a year or two in advance of what that's going to look like.
So, David, are you suggesting we add some extra criteria on that?
Under R2, add an and, you know, conformance with emerging policies and national infrastructure.
Okay. Because I'd like to make a motion that we actually accept these guidelines. I'm happy for that to be with the addition of that additional wording in R2.
I struggle with I understand where you're going, David, but the problem with that work at the moment is there's so few details on what that will be. And R2, you know, it could be in the plus side of the R2 as opposed to R2, but, you know, we hopefully will, you know, we want to push and get an R1 as soon as possible, and having concrete constraints around the R2, you know, it's going to have to really ramp up to understand the implications for some of that.
I think government hear you on that. And there is I can't say too much at the moment because of the processes that are underway currently. But there's a lot of focus on making sure that R2 is well informed by government in a very specific and technical manner.
We will do a scoping exercise for R2 as well, right? So when we get to the end, towards the end of R1, we'll say, okay, what's next? We'll have a backlog of all the things we didn't do in R1 that we pushed out to R1, and also we'll have new stuff injected as well, which might be that injection from government around that as well. So there is definitely no constraints on what's in R2. We'll have a backlog and we'll have new stuff come in, and then we'll say, okay, what's our next chunk we're going to do for R2, and identify that. And that will definitely be a process that we will get to as we get towards the end of R1. Before we finish R1, it was right at the end, we'll go, okay, now start planning for R2. What's that going to be? So,
Michael, I'm happy to second your motion to accept this as written.
Chris, are you able to launch a vote?
Yep. Okay. So we are voting. I'm going to launch a poll.
So I think just to confirm, we're voting as is without any changes. Are you okay with that, David, in the end? Without the changes on R2, or you want your change in R2?
No, I would vote against this at the moment. I think it needs an acknowledgement that government is going to play a role, both at a policy and a technical level, in R2. And this is really government is going to start stepping in and shaping a lot of this for a national approach.
But this is the discussion of the scope for R1. I don't think we want to get bogged
Well,
down.
I'm suggesting in R2 that there's an acknowledgement. You know, if we're talking about guidelines for inclusion in R1, yes, you've got the stuff in the green column and the yellow column. Awesome, fantastic. But if you're going to include a discussion of what R2 will include in terms of scope, and we start to work towards that and understand what is going to be pushed over, held over, I think there's a very large chunk of consideration that needs to be given to emerging policy and emerging national infrastructure needs.
Is it better just to change the column title to not in scope and not
Yes.
evoking the discussion of R2?
Yeah. That's fine.
Because I think that's what's meant by R2 plus. It just means not in scope for R1. But if we just call it that, that might help.
Yep.
Okay. Does that help then if we just do a friendly amendment here and say that not in scope for R1 is that criteria on that last column? Okay. Ruben, did you have another?
Yeah, sorry. I've literally just joined back in the last few minutes. I just wanted to check whether we defined technical context well enough for this to make sense.
There is a definition here. It's necessary context, security, privacy, or other technical data to implement AU eRequest data. eRequest DI data element.
So I guess I'm just not sure if that really goes far enough. I'm not sure, for example, whether the elements of a patient or a practitioner or an organization are covered by AU eRequesting DI, and whether that then falls into technical context or not.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the scope of AU eRequesting DI, there are some things that are explicitly stated as being out of scope. I don't have a verbatim offhand, but I think in my reading it did include workflow, administrative data, and there was something else there, billing. That reconciling that with that description, it's a good bit of chalk and cheese. So, you know, there are things, for instance, I mean, obviously the workflow is a big one here that, you know, things like statuses and stuff, that's not, that may or may not be part of the AU eRequest DI kind of scope, and therefore some of the statements here, it's not clear where there is a distinction, because this really does have a focus on technical, and that's not the language that reconciles with eRequesting DI.
Do we have another suggestion?
Additional context.
Instead of technical?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy with that. So if we've got two friendly amendments here then, so this is not technical or context, additional context. And then the R2 plus is out of scope for R1.
Do you call it necessary context?
The original intent here was basically stuff that's in fire that's required to make a fire interaction or a valid resource. So some of the things that are just not deemed as, or they're just assumed by the clinicians, things like dates and authors and all those sorts of things. So that's why it's called technical now. I think we're softening it so much it's almost becoming even worse. At least the term technical kind of alludes to the fact that we're talking technical design rather than clinical design.
Well, the point Andy and I made, Heath, is that it's not just technical, it's other things as well. We know that.
Oh, I mean, things like, for instance, billing, like is you know, billing, yes, it has a technical aspect to it, but it's actually another range of data to support the transaction. There is a technical representation, but then again, there's a technical representation of clinical data as well. If you are, I think if we are going to imply from it that this is about fire and about stuff that's defined in fire, that would be more accurate. But the major issue here is that it's very hard to draw a line in the sand and say this is absolutely on this side and this is absolutely on the other side.
Yeah, these are just guidelines, remember. So this is not black and white, right? It's not going to be, these are just guidelines for us to look at when we're trying to make scope decisions, right? There's nothing more than that. So we don't want to read too much into this and make this too rigid, right? And
Yeah, I still think technical is the word to use, and that we just got to not restrict ourselves in our thinking about what we mean is technical.
Yeah.
That's why I suggested additional.
Fire is technical. It's a technical implementation.
Yeah, some are really technical, but billing's technical, but in a different sense. And yeah, like representation of data is also technical.
Yeah, this is exactly why I'm suggesting the word additional, because we already know that there are technical and non-technical things at play here. And so I'd rather not have a guideline put something that's potentially misunderstood.
Are we considering here really that this means non-clinical? Items that do not have a clinical implication, because we already know we have to push everything clinical back to the DI anyway.
I think Brett's still working on how that harmonization process is going to work, if I understand correctly, Christopher.
I think it's really hard to say that something's non-clinical. It can still have clinical relevance. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, so can't use non-clinical.
And I think that's where I was going to come in earlier on. Sorry, I couldn't get there, but I was actually going to suggest we're discussing some things that maybe we need to close the loop back to the next event in Adelaide. I don't know.
So these guidelines are being used for our scope decisions today and tomorrow and the day after that. So if we can't even determine what our guidelines for inclusion are, how are we going to decide what's in or out of scope R1?
Well, Michael, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm saying is what we decide, then we should actually come back and actually have a conversation just to say this is what we've done. Just to close the loop. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not saying, no, let's push it back. I'm saying, let's make sure we close the loop. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think I would second Ruben's motion to use the word additional context, because I think we're just proving that technical is a very difficult word to use. So let's avoid it for now.
I'd be happy to put additional into maybe in scope, but if we're going to do that, we should potentially consider reducing this. The should be in scope. Should be in scope probably needs to be what's in AU eRequesting DI and only the minimum additional elements required to enable R1 to work, and probably nothing else. In other words, there should be no consideration of additional context in R1.
But when you say enable R1 to work, are you talking about enable R1 to actually be the foundation for a production use? Because in that case, things that we need to additionally cover, including, billing, other administrative data that needs to be carried, that is not in the scope of eRequesting DI, is going to have to be done. We can't, if this is only clinical context and only clinical data in its technical representation, that is insufficient to build from.
No, I didn't say that. I mean, that's a question about what is R1 for. The question around what is in scope for R1 should be only the things that are required for R1 to work. It shouldn't include anything that is defined as vague as additional, because that is too vague for the restricted scope. But we have a maybe in scope into which we can have those discussions.
I think that's why I suggested the words necessary, or if you'd use the word essential. I suppose my question is around these other kinds of things, like billing's been said a few times. How important is it that is something that there is national consensus on, as opposed to how to ask for a blood film? I think it's pretty important that there's a national consensus on that. But if you're talking with, a subsidiary lab about how you're going to pay for something, perhaps it's less important that that is in a national standard.
Yes.
Okay, a couple of points. Just a quick reply to that. The labs find it very important on who they are going to bill because they want to get paid. So that's been probably more important or just as important as what it is that they're actually getting requested to do. I'm still concerned that we're softening these things down. Now we keep referring back to billing, but billing is actually in AU eRec DI. And if we start to change this word, because there's alignment across things like AU Core, for example, and patient requesting in these inclusion guidelines. And we've used the term technical across all of those, and it has a meaning that it is basically fire-related technical aspects in addition to the clinical aspects that has been defined in the clinical models. So if we're starting to deviate from the wording here, I'm just a little bit concerned that we're opening up a can of worms around what does this mean in the context of eRequesting compared to AU Core and patient summary.
Yeah, that's a good point, Heath. That this technical sort of definition does exist outside of eRequesting as well.
Well, we've defined it on this page, and I don't think that that is broad enough. If we're dealing with things like a patient profile, a practitioner profile, a filler or placer profile, those are not
but it's
fire
no different
related.
No different to an allergy intolerance having a reference to a patient. No different to an allergy intolerance having a reference to an encounter. It's exactly the same stuff.
Yeah, but we are modeling
the same
patient,
definition.
Right? We are modeling a patient in this context.
No, we're not. We're just referring to AU Core.
Yeah.
And
So
we're just saying that there is a patient, that there is a requester. That's it.
So you're saying that there is no modeling of anything that is not covered by AU eRec DI in this IG beyond technical contexts like security, privacy, and
as an
things
example,
like status.
eRec DI does not even have an element for patient. All right, but that's the technical.
I know.
That's the technical context that's necessary for us to have a patient, to have a service request in fire, is to have a patient. So that's the kind of things that this committee, this group, has to determine how it's going to be supported. It's because it's not in eRec DI. It's the technical aspects of the context associated with a request. It's the workflow statuses. It's the fulfillment statuses. It's all those things that are technically orientated. And when it comes to something like billing, it's just basically a reference to billing. But what does that actually mean? Well, we're talking about things like codes. How do we represent things like that? They're a public payment. It's a private payment, etc. It's DBA payment. That's our responsibility because we're that's not detailed, but it's important in the context of the billing guidance that is referenced by eRequesting DI. So we're not inventing new stuff. We're just adding the additional technical context that's required to carry this in a technical manner across a wire using a standard such as FAR.
So just to clarify then, he's something like pregnancy status. I'm not sure if that's in AU eRec DI, but which of these scope things does that then fall into if we vote to include it?
Well, it's not. Yes.
High interest
Sorry?
from technical design group maybe in scope.
eRec DI did call it out. They just said that it would be deferred to eRec DI R2 pending further work on AU Core R2.
Yeah. But if it's not in there, it's high interest, right? So if it's something that we're looking at, so it falls in the maybe.
If it's been rejected.
I think where status affects reference ranges, which is part of the numerical representation of data, then I think it is technical.
Okay, can we move forward to a vote on this? I feel that given that this definition of technical context does exist in outside of eRequesting in AU Core, like as well, that we have the right definition there for it. These are only guidelines, so the high interest, if it doesn't fit that technical criteria, it falls in the high interest and can be brought in. This doesn't block anything from bringing in, it just helps us prioritize what we need to do to implement R1 or get things in scope for R1. So I would like to bring back the motion that this is accepted as is with the change of R2 plus to have scope for R1.
Does anyone want to second that?
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, so motion by Michael, seconded by Andrew. We will go to a vote. Sorry, I need to clear it out. I'm going to relaunch it. So if you voted before, please vote again. We had some extra discussion, so we'll vote again on that. You may vote affirmative, negative, or abstain.
So the only friendly amendment that's being applied is that it's not in R1 for that third blue column.
Correct.
All right, we'll close that one out in 3, 2, 1. You should see the results. That one has been passed. 20 affirmative to negative, 6 abstained.
Okay. I think that was an important conversation, so that was good to have.
We've got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah. And we're going to do use cases and essential scope items. So we've still got a long way to go. This is definitely one of my concerns is that with only so many meetings we have next year, that we don't normally get through a lot of items through a meeting. So we are going to have to find other mechanisms to get through this in a timely manner. But conversations are good. We have to have them. So it's a balancing act. Okay. So there was a Confluence page as well that was sent out to everyone to provide feedback on R1 use cases. So this was to just make sure they are what we want for R1, given that that's one of our inclusion criteria now, that it's required for an R1 use case. So the way this page was set up was we had the current description of the use case, potentially some rewording suggestions, as well as then a survey. So this wasn't a vote for whether we're making it scope or not, it was just to give a survey of whether people thought it was in scope or not in scope. I think what we're probably looking here is for outliers, anything that we want to take out of scope. Otherwise, I suspect they will stay in scope. So there's the way I probably want to approach this is by anything that is an outlier we need to discuss, we'll work through, and then maybe vote to take it out of scope. Otherwise, they would stay in scope if there's a reasonable consensus here on this survey. So this one here, which is the generic diagnostic imaging request, seemed to be reasonable consensus there that it stays in scope, which it has to be really. We as part of our scope is doing imaging. This was the suggested reword on this around a requesting clinician requires diagnostic imaging for a patient following consultation about an affected body part. The request includes details such as a patient demographics, including sex, gender, the type of test required, the target body site, the reason for requesting, relevant clinical background or circumstances related to the request, the distribution list for results, and billing related information. Now, Steph, I think I saw you had a comment on here saying that we essentially just broaden this even more and take out any contentious concepts like sex and gender. And really just to talk the high level use case. Requesting clinician requires diagnostic imaging for a patient. Request includes details such as patient demographics, type of test, target body site, reason for the request, relevant clinical context and supporting information, distribution list for results, and billing related information. Does anyone have any thoughts? If you look at the original one, it was very specific and it had things like carbon copy and all this extra detail in here. So I think what we're really doing is just generalizing this use case a bit more. That gives us the ability to make decisions in the TDG about exactly what is in or out without saying, well, the use case said we have to do implants, allergies, medicines, related results, that we broaden it. Vince?
Taking out the phrase of following a consultation about an affected body part, I think is a good change because I just think it's not necessary to specify that, and it's not always the case either.
Yeah.
And I think the revised text is good, but do we need to add not to be uploaded to MyHR as an important data element that's not really covered there?
I'm not sure if we do, because I mean that's not necessarily captured at the time of the request is created. That can be input later in the process by the patient.
It usually is in the paper world.
Yeah, and we have already included. We have said my health record consent is in scope. So
yes,
yeah, we have already identified that in a previous TDG as an in scope item.
We have. So I'm saying, does it need to be added to the?
But I'm wondering if it's actually part of the request though, because the patient could do that through a patient app after the request has been created, or through some other mechanism not part of the actual creation of service request.
It's part of the service request now in the paper world.
Yes, but does that constrain us on how we implement to the future, as having to tick that box at the time of creation? Versus,
I think that's necessary. It may not be sufficient, but I think it is a necessary requirement that the patient is able to have that box ticked on their behalf by the requesting clinician.
I'm wondering though whether that is actually a use case in its own about how that is done. But Ruben, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't quite follow that. Oh, okay.
Oh no, go ahead if that matter isn't resolved yet, Vince.
No.
Oh no, sorry. Is yours a different topic? Is it, Ruben?
Yeah, it is a different topic.
On this use case?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. So what do we end up deciding, that we don't need to put that in the use case, or because then we need to say that's included because there's
I'll open the floor. Anyone else got thoughts on whether we need to include my health record consent withdrawal in that list of things?
It's the usual, Michael, it's David, it's the usual process now that the GP discusses with the patient at that time whether they want it to be uploaded to my health record, and that's, I think, part of like the agency's advice on this as well, that they should have the opportunity at the time that they're requesting that whether it gets uploaded or not. So I think to not have the opportunity, they'll handwrite it on the bottom of the request, right? Or type it on the bottom of the request. And that's not what we want either.
Yeah. Okay.
I think,
well,
as a GP trainee, I would say it's probably not necessarily everyone's standard procedure to have that discussion with the patient for every single imaging request. If it's recorded in your practice software, I think it goes on automatically. But I suppose my expectation is the person providing the service actually makes sure they're not doing something the patient doesn't want.
And I think that's what I'm trying to say too, Thomas, to be honest with you. And where does it go if there's no spot for it on this?
I think it's good for the request to have a place to forward on the patient's expressed wishes, but it shouldn't be that not putting it there implies the patient has made a positive affirmation they want it, you know. I suppose the other thing that I would say is that actually at the time of making a request as a clinician, I don't necessarily know the billing for that patient. I might, in which case I'm happy to tell you their DVA, for example, but I don't know necessarily how you're going to bill that service.
Yeah,
that's fine. Anything that's a might, we have to put in the spec.
As of last week, the legal position is that this data will be uploaded to my HR unless the patient says otherwise. So that actually has changed as of last week, according to the Department of Health. That legislation passed. It's obviously still awaiting Governor General consent, etc. But that will be the government's requirement very shortly.
And I believe it's on a per request basis. So there's no just general, please don't send up my stuff to the My Health record. It needs to be specified on a per request basis. So I don't know any other alternative way of that to be dealt with at a per request basis.
Yeah. So I think we can add that in. We can add, it seems to be the consensus there. We add My Health record consent withdrawals to that list of things in that list.
And for pathology, Michael, as well. I know when we're
yeah, yeah, we've got a similar one for that. So that would be a mirror image of this.
Thanks, Mike.
Ruben, if we can move on.
Okay. Yeah, look, I want to challenge the idea that including sex and gender explicitly is contentious. I don't think it is contentious. It's explicitly included in the CDG's DI model for this. And more to the point, this is a clinical safety and social issue. I don't want it removed simply because it is assumed to be contentious. There are clinical safety reasons to have a reliable sex category for an imaging test, and there are misgendering risks of not including gender identity. So I'm arguing to please reinstate those.
I would agree with that. I actually reviewing a paper currently about how important this is in medical imaging in particular for the Australian Journal of whatever it's called. And it is particularly important that that information is contemporaneous to the request, not just pulled out of some previous patient records or that may or may not be updated. So having that information at the time the request is made is actually really important for interpretation as well as the safety of the patient when they're going to have the test done.
Thanks, I appreciate this.
Can I just jump in there?
That actually is not the issue. We're trying to set the scope here for eRequesting. That scope has already been set and determined and agreed in the base AU patient demographics. So it's there, and so I don't see why we need to state it explicitly here, because it's actually not to do with the scope of eRequesting.
Yeah, that's more or less the answer. We've been over that one a few times, and it's related to the DI specifically. So we don't need to worry too much about whether it is in or out in terms of that.
And I don't think we need to say that this is contentious or anything like that. It's not contentious. It's settled. We've already made that decision. It's there.
David?
Yeah, I raised my hand in response to a comment that was made when we were talking about My Health record consent, and I think, I don't remember the exact words used, but what I heard was that there was a suggestion that the provider might be able to update that in response to the patient's request. I'd just like to point out that, and I'm sure many people on this call have heard me say this before, but there is a significant proportion of pathology services where the pathology provider doesn't have any interaction with the patient. So it's not workable. And the reason why it's part of the scope for eRequesting is to the extent that pathology providers can be responsible for it, it has to be included in the request because we might not have any other interaction or patient information. And actually, ideally, our preference is that it's either handled directly by the patient in like interacting with My Health Record, so they can log in and say, I don't want any further information uploaded here, or that it's done with the requesting clinician.
Ruben, did you, is your hand still up or is it?
Sorry, that's an old one.
Okay. All right. I only have a few minutes left. I might motion then that we accept this wording. We'll leave the including sex and gender in. We'll just add to this list the My Health Record consent withdrawal. So this would be the text in this column for the suggested rewording. So as is worded there, leave the including sex and gender, add the addition of My Health Record consent withdrawal.
Can I just ask whether the inclusion of a reference to relevant clinical background is that just a boy's own adventure, or is there a scope to that? Because are we then saying we're going to include everything that anyone might deem as clinical background?
Does that mean just free text, basically? That's what all the systems I currently use to make those requests would have that kind of field?
That's not clear.
Well, the way we constrain that in the scope is we reference requesting.
I'm actually looking at this. Steph, had you reworded this, made a suggestion on rewording that part as well to relevant clinical context and supporting information? Was that?
Yes, I did, because
yeah.
I tried to use the same wording from the CDI.
Yep. I didn't pick that up as being changed as well.
But yes, it still needs to go through our scoping to understand in R1 if that's achieved through clinical notes or through structured data and references to those allergy intolerance and condition and everything under the sun resources.
Does that help, Andy, having relevant clinical context and supporting information, or is it still rather than just relevant clinical background and circumstances?
Well, before we were quite specific, even with the such as, and we've kind of gone now more generic. I don't mind. I think we're just kind of making this more more open and non-deterministic, which makes it much more difficult then when we're going to get into scope discussions, because we're not really setting a scope in this instance, a technical scope.
No, I think in the other way, it might have been going too far the other way, though, that it was saying that we would include implants, allergies, medicines, related pathology results. We would be doing all those things, and therefore that became our scope by being too prescriptive in this.
We may have to wrap this one up before we can make a vote on it, given the state of the discussion and the time remaining.
Yeah, so we'll leave this open. So these pages, you have emails for all the TDG members, have emails for this. So continue to, if you've got suggestions, if you can vote, so we can make these decisions more quickly in the meetings, will help by providing information on the page and helping us get consensus. Will help so that we can get the decisions in the meetings. So please go to these pages. We've got this one on the use cases. We have the other one, which is on the essential scope items. Please continue to do this. We'll have to bring it around to the next meeting, which is the, I'll find my window.
16th of January.
Oh, sorry. Too many windows.
Are we close enough to agree on this use case with the addition of the My Health Records withdrawal and putting the agenda back in? I mean, I'd certainly be happy to agree at this point. And then maybe those changes can be reflected in the other ones, and that would help us get through that.
I think there is some consensus, but there doesn't appear to be complete consensus, so I'm not going to allow a vote on it today. I'd rather give people some time to think about it first. Also, votes with 1 to 2 minutes to go generally not a great idea.
Yeah, I'll just jump to my right window if I can find it. Oh, I've lost my window presentation. So the next meeting is the 16th. Oh, here we go. Oh, lost my window again. We didn't get very far through all those today, but the next meeting, there we go. 16th of January. So we agreed we'll come back on the 16th of Jan and then 30th Jan. I think really we're burning meetings here with scope. So I think 16th of Jan has to be the day we get through as many of these as possible. So I know we're all going on leave and having a break, but anything you can contribute to those pages to help us get some consensus on that meeting when we return be very much appreciated.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Great discussion today. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a great break, and we'll see you all again on the 16th.
Thank you.
Thanks.